Davies, CEO from Ioetec. We're a Sheffield-based startup company, and we specialise in the cybersecurity of IoT devices, specifically the tiny devices that are resource constrained, this type of thing, and we're going to see them all over everywhere in our smart cities. And when Chris asked me to do a talk, I couldn't really work out what was the best thing to do, so I came up with this suggestion of smart sensors are the asbestos of the future. So I thought I'd better do a little quick background for the younger members of the audience here as to what the asbestos in our world look like. And probably most of you are familiar with this type of asbestos. It was the miracle construction material going back a decade or so, a century or so ago. Back in the 1930s, it started hitting mainstream construction. And it was used because it had superb insulating both thermal, electrical and sound insulation properties, and it was just put everywhere you could think of. It was pervasive. It was in our brake linings, in insulation around pipes, and using as roofing material. Many of you might see these in old garages all over. And as a material, when it's intact, it's actually still very good, even after all these years, but it's when it starts getting damaged and breaking up and the fibres getting out, as we have learned, is actually quite a dangerous material. It was used in this sort of environment in construction, where this guy here with very little protective equipment is spraying asbestos onto steel girders. I'll give you an idea, when the Twin Towers came down in New York a couple of decades ago, there was 1,000 tons of asbestos that was dispersed during those collapses. So it was just everywhere. But there were some other areas that you might not think of it. There was some put into filters of cigarettes, so if the nicotine didn't get you, the asbestos would. We actually used it as pretend snow on our Christmas trees in our thing. So this stuff was everywhere. It's quite amazing, really. So it was in every aspect of our lives, and I'm looking at these sensors now that are beginning to be introduced to every aspect of our lives, in our medical areas, in infrastructure, in our communication systems, transport, mobility, everywhere. Sensors are coming in. And are they smart? Some would say they're pretty stupid, because most of these sensors just don't have the necessary security in there to protect the data that is flowing through them. 8 billion devices, I think it's a little bit more now. They're producing 2.5 quintillion bits of data every day. That's got 13 zeros, I think, behind it. That's set to triple over the next year or so. So it's a phenomenal amount of data that is actually being pushed through these data. That's not including mobile phones, by the way. IoT data is great. That's the whole idea of it. It's reduced data that gives us better ways of making better decisions. It's to enhance our customers if we're in the business of selling goods. Increases our efficiency and optimises our operations and open new revenue streams. But there is a problem. As I said, they are alluded to, there are very little security that are put into these sensors. So some would say they're stupid rather than smart devices. The World Economic Forum's report last year cited that after climate change, extreme weather and natural disasters, all of which we've seen quite extreme examples in the recent months, state that data theft and fraud poses the next biggest economic global risk. And IoT threats are active and growing. We can see that the sort of most prolific IoT attacks started a few years ago. There are earlier examples of this, but the Mirai attack was probably the biggest contemporary attack of IoT, where 1.2 million IoT devices were attacked using default passwords in the CCTV DVRs, and they were used very efficiently in the denial of service attack on the eastern seaboard in the US that brought down companies like Twitter and Netflix for the day. And that has progressively gone on as we see more and more sophisticated methods of attacking IoT devices. They're opening up a huge new threat surface. Before, in the old days, we just had computers. It was easy to ring fence those with firewalls. But now, as we put more and more of these sensors in, it's opening up more vulnerabilities. This is a typical IoT ecosystem where you have the data being generated on the silicon, sitting on the device, right the way through its communication to the end user. Each of these areas are in themselves relatively secure. So the cloud servers look after themselves, AWS, Microsoft Azure, very, very good security. But as far as their edge is concerned, it's as far as they supply their service to. Beyond outside their servers is not the edge. Network operators like O2, Vodafone, same thing. Right down to the SIM is their security. Beyond that is not really their edge. And the silicon manufacturers, Intel, ARM, or what have you, they're securing their hardware, their silicon that's sitting on the devices. And then in between all of this, the manufacturers are making these really clever devices that actually do solve a lot of problems and serve their customers well. Think that everybody else is looking after their security, but they're not really, because there's no cohesive security that's looking after that whole journey, particularly of the data for which the IoT devices are being generated or being used for. There's no whole security all the way through, because you've got different communication protocols all the way through this. And so as a result of that, you get these different attack vectors all the way through this system. And there's plenty of people who take advantage of that for various reasons. At Ioetec, what we try to do, or our interest is in securing the data. And what we try and do is to secure the data at the very beginning, at the point of generation, and make sure that that data is encrypted all the way through its whole journey, right through to the end user. So really we are securing, rather than the pipeline, we're actually securing the contents of the pipe as that data is being transmitted. And so we say this is true end-to-end data security from the point of generation right the way through to the user access. This data is never unencrypted. Just to give you a bit of a use case then, many of you probably have heard of this, but it's worth just going over the Las Vegas fish tank attack. So the fish tank in a Las Vegas casino was on its own VPN network, and there was environmental monitoring that went on, sensors inside the fish tank, temperature control, salinity, etc. And I had to get one of these little logos on, because all hackers wear hoodies, of course. Hacked into the sensor itself, and was able, through that temperature sensor, was able to actually access the database in the main casino's database. And it was able to access the database for the high rollers. And they started transmitting it over to finish, and it was at that point it was detected. And then it was acted upon, and they shut it down, but not before 10 gigabyte of data of all of these high rollers was transmitted to Finland. And it highlights really the vulnerabilities that are being introduced as we keep on putting these sensors. We think they're a great idea, which of course they are, but we need to start thinking more about the unintended consequences as a result of our connecting devices, stuff to the internet. There is some light on the horizon that is hopefully going to start encouraging these manufacturers to start improving the security in these devices. The state of California introduced a bill the 1st of January this month that will make it a law that any manufacturer of any goods that are connected to the internet they must have security that is patchable and must use all reasonable efforts, I think is the terminology, to make sure that those devices are secure. So that's the first IoT specific legislation that's been brought in worldwide. Most recently, the Five Eyes, back in the summer of last year, have signed their intent to secure the Internet of Things. I'll just read you a few points down here which I've highlighted. That to acknowledge the vulnerabilities or compromised devices could have serious consequences for individuals, our economies and national security. So they are quite concerned at long last, the government, and consider the potential consequences of security flaws in IoT devices will be magnified by the introduction of 5G, and expect, that's the key word, expect manufacturers to develop consumer IoT devices with security built in by design. So the governments are finally waking up and realising that there is an inherent problem that we're building into our infrastructure, and really is the asbestos of the future. So unless we start doing something here and now about securing these devices, we are building in an issue that we will probably be regretting in not so distant future. So that's us. If you'd like to know a little bit more about IoT cybersecurity, next month we'll be holding a meetup similar to this over at the Cantor building at Hallam University, where I'm hoping John is going to do a further talk with us as well. But please feel free to come along and register. Thank you very much.